AskReddit Storytime. Please like and subscribe. What is the craziest encounter of rich kid syndrome that you have experienced? I lived with 5 guys and I was the only one whose parents weren't millionaires, not close at all. They never cleaned. About once a month I would deep clean the house, but 2 days later there was garbage and food on the floor. I found out they all told their parents the poor kid made all the messes when one of their moms came by to scream at me. I almost jumped off the couch at her, but the person to my side held me back. The guy whose mom it was took her outside and said, "Don't come over here to yell at my roommate." I was in disbelief of the whole event. A guy I met in my early 20s was the richest person I've ever known. His dad was CFO for a big bank, but died when my friend was 14. He grew up in a massive mansion, had his rent paid for in a luxury rental building, and had unlimited funds for drugs. Eventually, his mom forced him to go to rehab, which he did for a couple of months. One day, while he was at rehab, my roommate got a call from him. He said he's outside and didn't know where else to go. He had been cut off from his money, knew that we had an extra room, and asked if he could stay with us while he learned basic life skills, getting a job, buying groceries, cleaning, budgeting, etc. We let him, against our better judgment. About a month in, he had managed to stay sober, keep a job, and not be such a parasitic piece of shit. His mom thought he was doing better too, so she reconnected him to his money. His whole attitude and demeanor completely changed. All of a sudden it's, "I don't have to stay in this shitty apartment, living like I'm poor. I don't even have to stop doing drugs. I've got my money back." He left right before rent was due and basically told us to fuck ourselves. 2 months later, he had the exact same situation happen. His mom cut him off again, forced him to go to rehab. He left again and called us, but this time we figured he'd rather not live in our shitty apartment living like he's poor. Not scathing like most of the ones on here. I grew up attending a private school in a developing country, so a lot of my classmates were in the 1% of the country. Whenever we'd be swimming in the school pool, one friend of ours in particular would always remark that swimming is more fun if the pool has a current or waves. To which I had no idea what he was talking about and generally thought he was just being imaginative. One day he invited me over to his house for swimming, and he had a 50-foot indoor pool that generated a current, waves. He wasn't lying. They are a lot more fun. Girl I went to high school with got a Mercedes for her 16th birthday. And moaned about the fact that she didn't get a Lexus, because her name was Lexi and she thought it would be so cool for Lexi to drive a Lexus with a custom license plate saying Lexi. Her parents did cave and buy her a Lexus for her 17th birthday. My college roommate threw a massive tantrum, like on the floor screaming and crying, because her parents got her a used big-ass truck for graduation. It was a 2013 truck with less than 10k miles that was fully upgraded, loaded with every possible add-on. We graduated in 2014. The car was maybe a year old. She already had a 2009 Range Rover. This happened a couple of weeks ago at the Infiniti dealership. I was in the waiting room with a very well-dressed lady for our loaner cars. She left the waiting room to look at her loaner and came back crying. She said she drives a fully loaded QX80 and they gave her a QX60 with nothing in it. I said sorry that happened and asked how long she was going to have the loaner for. She said a couple of hours. I wanted to tell her to suck it up, but instead I sat there quiet thinking how life must be easy for her to cry over a loaner car. I actually have a bit of a different story than most of these. Met a friend in Econ 101 on my first day. Pretty humble kid and all-around good guy, so we got along well and were in the same study group. Turns out, kid's dad owned like a supermarket chain in HK and his mom is a managing director at a hedge fund on mainland China, and they were shit-loaded. He never let it show though, and I only found out after about 3-4 months of knowing him. His parents put him in boarding school when he was a kid, but he said it was actually pretty tough since the school gave zero fucks about privilege. Classes were like one teacher to every 3 kids and they were hardcore. They eventually sent him overseas for high school in this really upscale place in North Carolina for 4 years. He was one of the most well-mannered kid I knew in college and super humble. Got straight A's throughout college and made me pay attention to since I was prone to slacking. I ended up doing an internship in my junior year with his mom's fund and she wrote me a letter of recommendation later on to help me get a job. We still keep in touch occasionally and he's working for a bank in HK now, pretty much following his mom's footsteps. Still come by NY to visit every year and we usually have dinner with our so's. It's really weird cause I see these kids at school driving Autos/BMWs and this kid is just there to study like everyone else, even though his parents might be the most loaded people I've seen at the school. A friend I met at UNI flew from Auckland to London for a week to go shopping. Clothes were cheaper in London, so to him it made sense. His parents were from Singapore and had no idea just how much cheaper cars were in New Zealand. So when he said he needed $70,000 for a Toyota Corolla, they gave him the money and he bought a used BMW M3. When he went home for the summer he asked if I could mind the car for him. Given his dad had pretty much cut him off at that point, he just said I had to pay for insurance on it and I could treat it like my own. But as a 19-year-old sharing a flat and barely getting by, there was no way I could cover the cost of insurance, let alone petrol. Not exactly rich kid syndrome, but there was this family that had 2 children who attended the elementary school that was connected to my middle school. Every day the 2 parents would leave the house and drive separately to pick up their 2 kids before returning home. I should mention at this point that they each drove a Lamborghini, one black and one orange, back to back in the pickup line to get their kids from elementary school. At first I thought they were just being showy, but then I realized that they were 2-seaters, so this was really the only way to do it. My brother and I grew up working class, but when my mom remarried we were all of a sudden in the 1%. One day when we were in high school, my brother's girlfriend came over to our place in tears. It turns out the family's Mercedes was in the shop and she had to use the alley. I was teaching game theory and made up an example using roommates sharing cleaning duties. In my game, they could cooperate or shirk their cleaning duties. The goal was to model the strategic interaction. Like if you shirked, would the other person do the cleaning for you? Or would they also shirk to punish you? Would one person eventually break and clean? Or would it devolve into an overwhelming mess? The students were all confused. I figured it was something about the math and payoff matrix that lost them. Finally one raised her hand and said, "No. It's the premise. I don't get it. Why isn't the maid cleaning?" And this chorus of kids chimes in with, "Yeah. That's what I was wondering." First day as a librarian in a private school. Help a 7-year-old with the printer. He offers to tip me. I like this one because he's not a snot. He's just trying to be polite. I live in a town that sits on the shore of a really big, not great, but still big, lake. My friends and I decided a few years ago to buy a boat we could take out onto the open water. None of us are poor, but none of us have a shitload of extra money on the side, so we did it as cheap as we could. We bought a decent boat that was over 30 years old and spent 2 years rebuilding the engine, refinishing some of the interior, and generally getting the thing shipshape. We were super proud of the fact that we managed to get a fully functional and reliable boat together for a little under $5,000. Here is where the story starts. We were out on the boat on a beautiful Saturday drinking beers and cruising the beaches for girls that might want to ride on our new boat. This is why any straight man owns a boat. We pulled up to a beach and anchored, and eventually a few girls waded out to us to see if they could have a couple beers. One thing led to another and they were climbing aboard to head out for a spin. This is when I noticed one of the girls was not really excited to be on the boat. We got to the middle of the lake and started swimming off the boat, having a good time, except for that one girl. My friend asked her what was wrong. She replied, I don't even feel safe on this piece of shit. That's my grandmother's island over there, drop me off now. We were hurt that we had put so much effort into the boat and she dismissed it as a piece of garbage, but whatever, it is kind of a beater. We dropped her off on the island. The dock had over $5 million in boats parked at it. The girl sucked, but grandma was awesome. She brought us all ashore for beers and food and berated her granddaughter for being such a snob. Little old lady, 80 plus, lives out there alone all summer. We go back to the island all the time to help Granny with the yard work and such, in exchange for hanging out on a private island, but I haven't talked to the granddaughter since. AskReddit Storytime. Please like and subscribe.